Hi there and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to focus on functions, and these are really relevant for your performance task because 2 points are going to be assigned for your ability to write a function and describe what it's doing. So I'm going to focus in on functions in general, but also to talk about what you need to do for the performance task. And hopefully this will help you at least get those 2 points for the function section. Now, functions in AP are referred to as procedures. That's the general term for it. But what it is really is a piece of code that is reusable, will run whenever you call it, and it usually takes some kind of input and then gives some kind of output, right? Usually, a function's purpose is to do one job really well. So I always think of it like that. So I'll be talking about these topics. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing here parameters. What is a parameter and what does it look like? Now, the code I'm going to be writing in is JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with JavaScript, it's kind of similar to other languages, but it may be slightly different to yours if you're writing in a different language. But generally speaking, parameters are just the inputs. Return values. So this is the outputs of a function. What do we return at the end? Sometimes functions don't return anything. That's possible too. Sometimes they don't take any inputs. They might just do something when you run them. And no outputs, no inputs. They just do things. But in our code, for the performance task, we most likely will be at least taking parameters and possibly returning a value as well. We'll talk about good function structure and keeping your functions very clean and neat, and that's going to be important the more complicated things get. Having good structure will help you design a better function, and it will be easier to see what is right and wrong. Then we'll talk about globals and locals. This is, of course, talking about variables. The variables that you use in your functions, they are local usually, but you may need some global variables. And we'll talk about the differences. And then we'll talk about the performance task requirement of having sequencing, selection, and iteration, and what these kind of mean for your code. If you're not sure already, sequencing refers to just general code, which runs step by step. Selection meaning something like an if statement, or if and else. And iteration is a loop, like for or while. In College Board, it's like do, while, or things like that. So let's get to it. So let's talk first about parameters. Okay, well, actually, let's look at a basic function. In JavaScript, we write function to say we're going to define a new function. And I'm going to call my function x. Really great name for my function. My input, I'm going to take y. And what I want is for me to return y plus 1. This is probably the most basic function I can think of, but it takes a parameter and it returns a value at the end. Okay, so I run my code. What happens? Nothing happens because we haven't used the function. Functions, this is a definition, right? Now, a good practice is to write your comments for your function even before you write your function. Now, I didn't do that, bad practice, but I suggest that's a great idea. To have an idea of what your function is meant to do, you should write comments. Now, I would say returns the input value plus 1. That's pretty much the function of my code. Okay? There's no other requirements in my code. There's no things that I expect it to be. I don't expect y to be greater than 0 or less than 0. It's just going to add 1 to whatever y is. Now, as I said, it's not working right now because I haven't used it. Functions are sections of code that won't run unless you use them. You can even hide them away usually in the coding thing, and we can just hide that code. But when I think about x, if I want to run x, well, now I could maybe print something out. So I could say print ln, and then I could use my function here, x, and give it a number like 3. And what's it going to print out? Well, it's going to run this code first. It's going to work out what this is, and it's going to send this up to here. So I'm going to be running this x function, and instead of y, I mean, y is a general variable to say that's my input variable, but the y is going to get replaced with 3, and then 3 would be here as well. And so it's really just a general variable here, which we're taking as an input. So I can do many numbers. Let's copy that, and let's test it out on a few different numbers, -1 and 7. And when we print, we should get the output, right? So it takes this value, turns that into 4, turns that into 8, and turns that into 0. Okay, very basic, but that's the structure of a function. Now, you can have as many parameters as you like. You just have to separate them usually with a comma. Now, in some languages, you might have to put the type before it, but in JavaScript, you don't have to name the type of the variable. But we could have z, and instead of doing that, I'm just going to do x, y plus z. So I change my definition. So returns the inputs added together. Okay. And so the function, may be slightly useful, but parameters are the general inputs, right? So it's when you're looking at a function, think of it as like a general way of describing a problem and solving it. Okay, let's do something a little more complicated. Let's say I want to give my function a list instead. Okay, so I'm going to, actually, let's give it a search term, right? So I'm going to say, so my search term is hello, okay? And let's say I have a list in my, I have a list here, so words list. And I can make a bunch of word lists, so I'm just going to add a bunch of words like egg, goodbye, and hello. So, very simple list. So, I want to search my list for a word. So let me change my function around here. And I probably got these in the wrong order, so let's just move them back. Now that I'm coming up here, I'm now talking about globals. So you notice here that I did save this for later, but I'm going to talk about this now. This search term is a variable that's outside a function. It's up here, which is, well, hang on, let me put it in the right place. I'm going to put that there. Okay, so I'm talking about global variables now. These variables, because they're defined outside a function, they're known as global variables. Okay, whereas these variables that are defined here, if I have, say, a search term, st, I'll call it st, this is a local variable. Similarly, if I make a variable inside here, I could make a temp variable. That variable is also local, right? So these are all local variables that when my function stops running at the end here, these will go away. These will disappear. And so the global variables will last throughout your code, and you can use them anywhere. But the local variables will disappear. Why is it relevant? Well, why wouldn't you just define everything as a global variable so you can use it anywhere? The problem with a global variable is that because it can be used anywhere, it can also be updated anywhere. That means that if one piece of your code decided to update this, and then another piece of code wanted to use it, and then it turned out to be the wrong value, you would then have to try and look through your code and figure out where exactly is my bug. And that would lead to bugs being spread out really far and wide. So the general good way of writing functions is to define only the variables that you need as close to when you need them as possible. So if I really need to use a variable like temp, I'm going to define it here, use it here, and if I don't need it later, then it's better to get rid of it, right? So let's say that search term is here, and I'm actually going to get this from the user input, but right now I'm just going to type the word that I'm looking for, but this will be occurring somewhere else in my code. And the words list might be a list that we are saving at the top of our code. So let's say, for example, this is imported at the top, and this is a list of our words from a dictionary or something like that. And so we've saved this separately. The job of this X function is to take this string input and then to search the words list for a match. And if it's a match, we're going to return true. And if it's not a match, we return false. And I don't think we need this temp variable. So let's go through our words list. So let's say for var I equals 0, I less than words.length, I plus plus. This is a standard for loop to search a list. This is how we go through the whole list, and we're basing our search on the index of this list. So it starts at 0, 1, 2. Now, I need to check, as I do each word here, I'm going to check and see if it matches the word that I'm looking for. So st, does it match st? Remember, I'm not looking for this variable up here. I'm going to be using this function later with the real word that I'm looking for. But right now, I'm just defining a general term, which is this input variable, right? I'm saying in a general way, I'm going to take this input variable and I'm going to search for if it's a match. And so even though I'm using a definite words, I'm using the global variable here. In this case, this part is the general part. Now, you could rewrite this by saying list, which I would prefer. I think that would be better. The reason why is because if I'm passing as inputs a search term and a list, it means that I don't have to refer to global variables. Meaning that my function is now totally general. So if I say L, my list, or I'll just say WL, word list. Now I can just pass whatever variables I want into this. Now it might be different terms, different lists. I can now use it for not just a words list, but for any list. And so this is where we talk about good function writing. When you're writing a function, you want to do this. You want to make it as general as possible so that you can pass things in and get them out, and you won't have to rewrite your code later in case you change some of the global variables or you change some of the things you're using. So this is how I'd recommend you do it. We got a general list that we're given, a word list, and a search term. And we're going to search this word list up to the length of that word list for that term. So let's look at each item. If each item that we're looking at, the word list, and use the index I, if that equals the search term, then we know we've found a match, and we can return true. Now in this case, this function, and we'll call it just search, I think. So let's call this a search function, and checks to see if takes a search term and a list, returns true if the search term is in the list. Okay. Now, if it doesn't return true, then we'll change that to return false. And so now we can try and use our function. We have our global variables, which is fine, but we now can use this by passing these two things into a call to this function. So let's go here. And now you'll also notice that I've got sequencing, selection, and iteration in my code. So I'll put that down here to talk about it a little bit later. But we do have those in there. Here's our sequencing, is just the code is following one thing to the next thing. Here's our selection statement, so I'm going to put that there. And there's our iteration. Oops. Iteration, whoops. Iteration over the list. Okay, so we're iterating over that list. We've got selection statement where we're selecting either this, we're going to do this, or we're going to not do that. Okay, and so now let's use the function and let's search for, so we're going to use the search. So I'll type search, and I'm going to put in the search term and the words list. So I'm passing in the things that I need. Now I can pretty much forget this. Okay, this definition, that's done now. I don't even need to worry about what's in there. I will open it up again, but if this was my code, I'd probably close it down. If I tested it out and it worked, I would close it down. But here we're passing in the words list and there, and we're going to run that. And do we get a result? No, we don't, because I did, what didn't I do? I didn't print out anything. So let's print that. Silly me. Let's print that out. Okay, so we get a true. So now I'll try and change the search term with another word. So let's just type in banana. And do I get a result? Yes, I get a false. Now I could change. Let's say I just change this list to WS, and I go and change that. It's still going to work because my function is now a general function. It doesn't care that I've changed the definition or the name, because this is a general term for a words list. And so this is where it's key. Make your functions general as possible so that they can handle many different kinds of things. Now I could also have another list. I could have a list of numbers. Will it be able to handle my search if I just change that to RS? So now I can search for many things in my list. Do I have a 5 in there? Yes, I do. So you can see that by creating this general inputs, if I just left it at search term and then put my words list in here, that would have meant that I would have had to update my function to change it, and I also wouldn't have been able to make extra lists and test those as well. So this search function is much more useful when it's general rather than just make it really specific about one thing. So I suggest that you try and do that too. Now another thing we'll talk about with functions is sometimes your functions will need to establish some variables as part of their operation, right? Let's say, for example, you might have, let's say, you might need to adjust this search term before you start, or you might get the length of the word list before you start, because maybe you just want to use it again. For example, like let's say if the search term is the same length as the word, then print it out. And so let's sort of modify this function now. Let's say print a list of words that matches, return. Let's return a list of words. So this time we're not going to return one word, we're going to return a list of words that have the length given in the first parameter. Okay, so let's call this the length of the word. And let's have this as the list. Okay. Actually, I'm going to call this array, R. Okay, so let's just say I have a length here, and I have an array here. And if the word has the same length as this, then maybe I will return it. Okay. So and I'm going to return a list as well. Okay, so if I'm returning more than one item, like here we're returning false. If we were returning the result of this search before, I might have returned the index, maybe I, or -1. If I was some searches, like if you're searching for something, it'll return the index that it's at, or return -1 if it doesn't find the result. So sometimes you return one thing, but if you want to return many things, you need to create a new list or an array. So I'm going to create a new list with RL called return list, and I'm going to start with it being empty. So that's an empty list, and I'm going to go through my list and check each. I have to change that one because I renamed my thing to match, right? So I'm going to go through this list, and if we get a match with the length of that word. So if now I have to find out how to find the length of a word. Can I do .length? I think. Let's just double check with string methods. I have to remember. Let's see, strings. Okay. So it's just the same. .len. Okay, so .len length. Okay, so if the string .length equals len. There we go. Close it down now. So if the item that I'm looking at, the length of that item is length, I want to add to RL list. Okay, and then at the end of my code, when it all finishes, I'm going to return RL. So this, now I haven't written the code here for how to do it yet, but that's a good way to do it if you want to just comment the thing that you're trying to do, and you can find out how to do it later. But at the end, I'm going to return this list. And so what this function is going to do is give me, I'm going to call this find lengths. So I'm just renaming that, and now I do have change this list. I don't need this anymore. I'll just delete that. And I don't need that anymore. I'll delete that. Okay, so let's do this with WS, and let's look for all words that are like 3. And this is called now find lengths. Okay, so let's see if this works. It's going to take a number called len, it's going to take an array, and it's going to go through. Now, generally speaking, your functions have 3 parts. You define variables, and maybe let's make another variable. Var AL is array length. I'm going to say is r.length, right? And I'm going to make my code even neater just by say AL here. Replace that. Is it necessary? No. But I'm just going to show you that generally speaking, we define our variables at the top so that they're all fixed. If you need to do any math calculations, like define some calculations, like if you want to calculate the radius of the circle that you're trying to use, or you want to calculate the area, do it up there, and then you can just refer to the variable later in your code. It will make things much simpler. You don't want to be doing it all jumbled up together if you can help it. So anything you need to do to define things, get things simpler, do it up here in your definitions. And that kind of goes for your whole code too. If you've got definitions to do it at the top of your code, and then solve your problems later on. Okay. So this is the loop to search through the list, right? So we're going to go from 0 to the less than the length of that list. And we're going to check and see if the length of the word equals len. We're going to add it to the list. Okay, so how do we add to a list? Well, in this version of JavaScript, and I say this version because Code.js and Code.org have different versions. Your platform may have a different version, but some of them use different terms. They're sort of generally the same, but there's about 10%, which is a bit different. So to add to that list, I think I'm going to use push. Oh, hang on, not that list, different list. I want a RL list. Dot push, and I'm going to push this word, which is at that array index, that index. I'm going to push that into my new list. Okay. So this will add that if it does match with the length, it'll add it to the list and then return it. Okay. And now I have a problem where I could just print it out. So let's just try. Yeah. Okay. So I found egg. Okay. Let's add a new word in the end here. Like B and 4. And then let's run. And so you can see it matches all of those words. Now, if I change the thing that I'm calling it with, let's add in here, println, find lengths, and let's use 5 in the same list. And you should see now it prints out a different result, prints out the hello. And let's do it one more time. Let's do it with 6, which it doesn't occur. And then we have an empty list, hopefully. Yes, an empty list. So you see it didn't put anything into that list. All right. Now, so we're pretty good. This still has sequencing, selection, and iteration here. We can, now, when it comes to your written response, one of the questions is going to ask you, show your function with 2 different results, and when it will run a certain piece of code and when it won't run a certain piece of code. So, for example, in this case, if I have 3, you can see that I do run this code here if this is a match, right, to the 3. If I find a word, and there's certain cases where it does match. So if I called this call here, that would match and run this code here. However, if I ran with this code, it would search, it would run that, it would check this, but it would never run this piece of code here. And so that's an indication that it's running different parts of the code based on that selection statement. And that's part of what you need to show, is that you need to show that it's branching in different ways, that in some cases it's going to run that code, in other cases it's not going to run that code, and the results will be different. All right, so I've talked about parameters, yes. I've talked about return values, yes. So if you're returning more than one, we've talked about how to use a list instead. We've talked about good function structure, yeah, defining your stuff at the start. Now, globals, and we talked about globals and locals. Okay, so in your code, you may be dealing with some big lists, which are imported. Maybe in code.org, you import your, use the databases there to import some lists. So let's go now to a realistic way of doing things, where many students have done this in the project, where they're finding it hard to figure out how to use their function with their list. And what is the function meant to do? The first step in defining your function, okay, and I'll go through, it's kind of going through it again, but I'm going to tell you one more time just to make it clear. When you start your function, define what the function's purpose is. You can do it in comments. So it should do one task very well in a general way. That's the goal, is your function. So if let's say you have a whole list of artists, okay, or maybe it's just music, like, so maybe you have in your list, and let's redefine this list. Let's say I have a bunch of songs, okay? So my first list might be artists, and this might be tracks, and I might have, well, that's enough for now. So let's say I have the Beatles, and then I have Drake, and I have somewhere in the middle Tupac. Okay, so now I have yesterday as the title. Am I doing this the right way? Yep, yesterday, and then I have and then I have okay. Well, that's actually not well. Okay, anyway, you get the point. So here's my list, and I want to search for all the tracks by a certain artist. Now, assume that my lists, and this is the one thing you have to do, is assume that your list is 1,000,000 items long, okay? The point of this, using a list, is to make your life simpler by using data abstraction. So it does help to think of your list as something that is really, really long and that you wouldn't be able to do manually. And so what we want to do is I want to search for like the artist that I'm looking for, and then I want to print out the track that matches those. So I want to find all the tracks that match that artist, okay? So this is where I'm just going to erase all this stuff now. So I'm going to ignore this function. Let's put it down the bottom. Okay, I'll put that function there, hide it away. All right, so the function's purpose. What is the function's purpose? Now I kind of have an idea what I'm trying to do. The function's purpose is search given input of artist, return all tracks by that artist. Okay. And that's its job. That's the job. So I have, now, note, I have the input that I'm trying to use, and I have the output that I want, right? So it's all about input, output, okay? Input, output, storage, processing is the model, right? We take some input. So let's go with inputs. Function, get tracks, and artist here. Okay, so now that's my input. I know that I'm going to take an artist name here, and this is a general term, the general variable for the artist, right? When I use the actual artist, it's going to be something like this, but here is my general input. If I have the artist coming in here, what am I going to do? I'm going to search my artists lists, but now do I want to have, like, do I want to use my global list of artists? Or do I want to just search for, maybe do I want to just return, yeah, like, so do I want to return all tracks, or do I want to just return a list of indexes, or what? Now, if, let's consider this. If I return all tracks, which I could do, what if I then decide, oh, you know what, I kind of want to have the length of the song. I also want to, like, you know, also kind of have the minutes, and then you start to, you know, your project starts to expand, and you say, okay, I'm going to have like this one goes for like 4.5 minutes. It doesn't go 4.2 minutes, and then the next one goes for like 3.8 minutes, and then the last one goes for like 5.3 minutes. So now I have a list of lengths of my thing. Now, if I'm returning tracks, now I've got to write another function for get lengths, and so now I'm going to do the whole thing again, but with lengths. So maybe if I'm thinking generally, is it better to have these as they're matching, right? This one matches this one, matches this one. They're all at 0, 0, 0 in the index of this list. Same with this one is at 1, 1, 1. So is it better, instead of returning the tracks, is it better to return the indexes right? So maybe I should be returning return all indexes that match artist. Now I'm going to get a list of indexes that I can use to either get the track, get the length, right, and the artists, right? I know the artists already, but I might find that much more useful to return the index, and therefore I can keep adding more lists once my code gets sort of more detailed, or I want to expand my project, okay? So, I mean, this is what happens in real life when you decide to want to add a feature, then you have to go back and recode everything. What you want to do is avoid it and make your project, what's that word that we studied it in networking? Scalability, right? How can your project or your program adapt to changes in size? And so this is where I'm trying to build in some scalability by thinking about what if I want more, right? What if I need more? So in this case, let's return the indexes if we find the artist, okay? So let's do the same thing where we're going to make a list, okay? So I'm going to return list, and I'm going to make an empty list here, and then I'm going to go through my my list of, well, which list? Which list am I going through? Am I going to use the artists list, or am I going to take a list in here? Maybe I should just take a list, and then my code is useful for finding a match. In fact, wouldn't this be almost the same as this code here? Not that code, the one that I wrote before, the search code. It's kind of very similar then. So if I'm looking for a search term and a search list, or an array. So really, if I look at it in general ways, I have a search term and then an array. And I'm going to search this term for this array, because then I could use that to search for anything I wanted to. So really, what I'm actually doing is writing a general search function, which now I could search for artists, I could search for tracks, I could search for lengths, using the same kind of code. So now I'm thinking in general terms. I'm trying to solve a general problem, and now I'm not just writing code that's specific for one problem, but I'm writing it for all problems. Okay, so let's try. I'm going to search. So this array. So I have this var I equals 0, same for loop, I less than array.length, I plus plus. And I'm going to go if the search term, or sorry, if the array at that index equals the search term, then let's add it to the list. And we go rl.push and the array I. Now, are we looking to, no, we're not adding the item. We just want to return the index, right? Only indexes. So at the end, I'm going to, once I finish the for loop, I'm going to return the list once that's done. Okay. Okay, so here I can now search pretty much anything I want. And I've expanded the function a little bit here by saying, given a search term, and an array, return all indexes that match. So now it's not even about artist, it's about whatever I want it to be. Okay, all I need is a term and an array. So let's go test this out. Let's search for, so I'm going to print this out, a list of the indexes that match with, say, Drake. So I'm searching for Drake in which array? The artists array. Wait, gotta use my search function. Okay, so I'm putting my search function inside the print statement. And let's see if it matches. Do I get a list of, yes I do, I get 1 in my list. So you see I've got, Drake's at 1, right, position 1. And so now I could look up, I could print out, if I wanted to use that information, instead of printing it, I could say, okay, let's var D index. So I'm looking for Drake. The Drake index is at 1, and so then I can use that dint to print ln the tracks, and I can use that D index. I'll just use the first one, and then I can print out the track. Whoa, what's happened here? Too many. Didn't remove that one. Okay, so good. There we go. So I found the track that related to that, right? So now I could say I could just put in here Drake, and there we go, and I can use that to find the track. All right, and so now I'm kind of closer to using this search function, which is searching the thing by the artist, right? Now this is not gonna, if I have many, obviously I need to fix this, I can't just write it like this, but you get the idea that we're now using something which is useful, general. I could now search for, let's search the tracks for yesterday. And it should return, I gotta print it out again. Okay, print. Okay, let's print that out, print the result out. And I'm searching the tracks for yesterday, and I find it's at position 0, right? So I can then use that to use that 0 in the artists column, find the track length. All right. So it becomes possible to use my function, and now I can just forget about my function. I know what it takes. I know the inputs. I know the outputs. So therefore, I can then go and use it in a very easy way in my code. So this is the challenge. I mean, the challenge is to get your functions so that they're simple, general, but super useful. And I think that's pretty much it. Like I hope that's been a little bit better explanation onto how functions work. What functions do is they save us from having to write the same code over and over again. Okay, instead of writing code which is just like searching through our list and then it does it one time, I've actually written some code here which can search through any list for any term that you're looking for and then return a result. And that's the goal, is remember, keep it like definitions, processing, and then outputs. Keep it like that. Try not to get things all too confused together. Make your life as simple as possible by getting everything right, processing it, then giving an output. Once you're done with it, you've tested it and it works, then you're on your way. Okay, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.